Hi, so this is creating the Clock Lancet effect that you would have seen if you had read our part 23 article for Vampire Survivors, the tutorial, or if you have seen any of my live streams in the past couple of weeks. What I'm trying to create here is basically this. So we have a weapon, and what I want to do is just go through how this beam here is created and debuff effect as well. So if you look at the weapon, right, when an enemy gets hit by the freeze effect, then you have this buff effect that appears as well. So I just want to go through how all of this stuff is created. But if you want to follow this tutorial, you have to watch first our particle effects introduction video. There is this big title and it says watch this first particle effects introduction. Okay, so you want to watch that because we're going to be using some materials from that tutorial and a sprite sheet from that tutorial as well. So what I'm going to do as well is I'm just going to create an empty scene. I'm just going to start setting up the particle effect on there. I'm going to set the camera to black so that we can see, or just the grayish color so that we can see the particle effect. So what that particle effect is made of essentially is it's just a game object with a trail renderer. So let me just show you how that works. So I'm just going to create an empty game object first. I'm just going to leave it somewhere around here, and I'm going to add a trail renderer to it. And when you add a trail renderer to game object, it leaves a trail like that. And our job is basically to spice up the trail. Usually with a trail, what you do is you assign a default line material. So Unity has this default line material. If you're using either the URP or the built-in render pipeline, you should be able to find a material for lines. And they are used for line renderers and trail renderers. So there are a couple of things that you can do with trail renderers. Let me just call this projectile. And when you assign the line material, you will see the line here is white, and you can do a couple of things with the trails. First thing I'm going to do is just to reduce the duration of the trail so that it doesn't leave such a long trail, you know, so that it goes away after a while. Second thing I'm going to do is with this trail, I'm just going to grab the width over here and just going to add a key like that. So then what this does is this makes the trail have a pointed edge like that. And I'm just going to increase the corner vertices as well. Let me just increase the time back so that the trail lasts for a little bit longer so we can see what the effects of this is. So I'm just gonna increase the corner vertices and the end cap vertices as well. So what this does is this rounds out the edges of the trail. So then we get something like this. As you change the settings, you want to also move the projectile around, and this can show you how the trail is going to look like. Right, so you just want to give a reasonable value. So the higher the value here, the sharper the head will be, but then of course the more expensive the trail will be to render as well. So you might want to just strike a balance. For corner vertices, I'm going to increase it to a higher value, because in that way you will get less jankiness around the edges like that. See? So the higher your corner vertices, the smoother this stuff will look. So I'm just going to strike a balance between speed and performance and just move the trail around. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to set the time back to 0.5. Then you see the trail is a lot shorter, right? Okay, so following this, what I'm going to do is to go to color over here and just set the color of my trail to the bluish color that you see in the initial effect. And for the color as well, I'm just going to remove the other color over here, so then it's just one flat color like this. And I'm also going to set the transparency of the trail to 0 at the end, like that. And at the start of the trail, I'm also going to reduce the transparency over here. So this is not going to be an exact one-to-one replica of what I've just shown you, because I am doing this blind basically, so my settings are not going to be the same. Okay, so you have kind of like a trail over here. It's nothing like what I've shown you, but it's a working thing. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is right now it looks like a flat color, okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you what happens when I replace this material with the additive material that you see on our tutorial. So the particle effect tutorial, okay, if I replace it, you will see that it's actually brighter. If I were to increase the transparency over here, you will be able to see it. There is some brightness to it. Okay, perhaps you can't really see it that clearly now. I'm just gonna put two trail renderers together later on, and you'll be able to see that. So I'm just gonna reduce the transparency here. This additive particle here is what we're going for, but the problem is that the additive particle has a circular texture. If I put a square texture over here, which is totally fine as well actually, but it affects some of the particles on my project, so I can't do that. Anyway, so if I change the additive particle here to a square, maybe I can just put a square here. Square, there we go. So this is one of Infinity's default textures. So with a square here, you will see what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna temporarily change my additive particle to use a square. I can't use a square here because this will affect the rest of my particle effects on my project. Okay, but right now if I duplicate this projectile, and let me just call this baby projectile, and I reduce the width of this baby projectile over here to say 0.5, what you see is that now I have two projectiles that are inside, which makes everything look a little bit nicer. It's more layered. Now the problem is that there are still quite a lot of hard edges. If I were to set this to 5, and see, it still looks very hard, the whole projectile here. We're almost there, it just looks very hard, and we're gonna do something to change that around as well. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to be creating a texture that looks like this. And you can do it in Photoshop or in any image editing program that you have. Create a beam texture that is 1 to 8 by 1. You don't really need a very big piece of texture over here. And to do this in Photoshop is really pretty simple. You just gotta have an empty image over here and just go to blending options and then just do a gradient overlay, and you should be able to have a reflected you should make it reflected over here, check gradient overlay and check reverse, and then you have the beam effect. You want to make sure that your beam effect points to the left and right, because that's how textures are handled in Unity. I'm just gonna grab this, I'm gonna merge this effect down, and this gives me a black and white, right? I'm gonna create one more layer that's white. Let me just paint this white, and this black and white layer right here, I'm just gonna Control A, Control C to copy and paste it, and review the layer mask, alternate left click here, and I'll paste the layer mask over here. So what this gets me is, this gets me an effect that looks like this, and this is, well, it's transparency, right? So basically here, this black and white image, the black represents transparent, and I open a layer mask, and basically I just place the layer mask into the white layer and I get something like this. So with my particle effects, I like to get my graphics, my textures to all be white, because then you can color the white color any color that you want. So after you do this, you can just save this as a PNG and import this into your project, and you'll get something like this. Okay, next thing you want to do after you get this is to create a material using this image. Alright, so I'm going to create a material here, so I'm just going to go here, standard, and then particle, standard unlit. If you're on URP, you can find a similar setting. So URP will be something like URP, particles, and then unlit. And rendering mode here, you're gonna go additive and multiply, or multiply additive, up to you. Okay, you can play around with a couple of options and see which one suits you the most. So once I get my texture, I'm just gonna name this E, or you can call it anything you want. I name it additive B. So if you want to understand what the additive mode does, you want to head over to the other video. I don't want to drag this video out too long. And last thing I want to do is to go to the maps here under albedo, right, to find my beam and assign it. And this will give me a material like this. So when I assign this beam to the projectile, right, it makes the whole thing look softer. I'm just gonna call this additive beam, and I'm just gonna assign this to both the baby projectile and the projectile. And then you have two layers, right, which looks really fantastic. The last thing that you'll notice is that in our particle effect, there are some sparks as well. So if you want to get the exact look that we have over here with the beam, right, you just gotta adjust the transparency with your particles. So the last thing you want to do is to have these dots over here, and these dots over here are done by just adding a particle effect. I'm just gonna add a particle effect right here. And what I'm gonna do here is to set the particle effect shape to be a sphere, and I'm gonna set the radius to be a very small value, and I'm gonna set the emission over here to be rate over time 0. I'm just gonna set rate over distance to just some value, and then we will see how this works out. So you see when I move this particle effect around, a bunch of particles appear, and this is exactly what we want. Okay, so we just want to have these particles appear. So now when I move the projectile around, right, I've gotta make sure that the positions are overlaid on one another. So make sure the baby projectile and the particle system, they're all on their positions are all 0. That was why it was looking weird. So now, yeah, it looks a lot better now, right? Look at that. So we have the baby projectile and we have the projectile itself. Again, you want to adjust the transparency to play around with that and you'll get the effect that you want. So when they both combine together, you get this really bright beam that looks amazing. Yeah, and you have this little thing at the head also. Looks very frosty now, right? So the last thing you want to do is for the particle system to just head inside there, and when you move around, you see the particles start appearing, but I guess we can't really see that here because you have to move the particle system itself. Before we dampen that, actually, let's go over to the size, and let's just reduce the size to 0.1, 0.2. And you can move the particle around to kind of see how it looks like, but make sure always to reset the position back to 0. And next thing I'm going to do is to set the start color to be similar to the color of my beam, and I want to go to renderer and change the material to be an additive material as well. Okay, I'm just going to change the additive material texture back to the circle because I changed it over to something else just now. Go back to default particle, this, and then you get a whole bunch of small particles like that. Making it additive is really important because that makes it look glowy, and the glowiness is what makes the effect look great. And next thing I want to do is to reduce the lifetime, say 0.2 to 0.4, and then we'll have this. See that? So over here the particles are moving a little bit far, but before that, let's next just change the simulation space to world. And you see once you move, it leaves a trail like that, which is really beautiful. Then the next thing is just to control how far you want the particles to go, right? You can play around with the speed to kind of get that. It's the simplest way to do that. And then I also like to do a size over lifetime to get the particle to fade away, but that's really up to you. So for size over lifetime, once I check it, what I'm going to do is just to make the particle go smaller over time. And then what I'll get is, you see, yeah, it's a very nice sparkly effect over here. And after that, we can zero it out, and then we can test out the projectile. So I'm just going to call this sparks. So the last thing I'm going to do is to add a rigid body. And after that, add a constant force 2D and just move it like say 50 units per second. And you will see the projectile just fly across the screen with particles coming out. So I've added the components in the wrong place. That's why. Let me just remove them. It should be added to the parent projectile over here. Rigid body 2D. And constant force 2D. I'm just gonna set the gravity scale to 0 as well so that it doesn't fall over time. And there we go. So it looks a little different, right? Firstly, the trail lasts for very long, so I just gotta go back and decrease the time to 0.5. And for the particle sizes themselves, if you find them too small, I find them a little too small, so I can just increase the size over here. So particle effects require like quite a bit of tweaking to get right. So that's why you see me just playing around with values a little bit, because I'm creating them impromptu. So one thing that you'll see is if you're making this effect for say a frostier weapon. So right now I'm making this for the Clock Lancet, right, which is a time-based weapon. But say if you want to make everything look more frosty, you can increase the size of the snowflakes. And you can also, I found this pixel art snowflake sprite over here. It's really useful because if you pay attention to the particle effects that video games have, right, usually for frosty effects, they'll just have snowflake patterns. You can go to open game art content, pixel art snowflakes. I'll leave the link in the description below. Just gonna re-import them in the base folder here. Pixel snowflakes right here. And this sprite here, you will want to make them multiple and then just go to the sprite editor and start slicing it. So there are 6 by 3. So I'm just gonna make 6 by 3 here, slice it, and apply it. And after that, you have a bunch of sprites, right? And if you're using only the built-in render pipeline and the URP, you can go over to your sparks over here and just go to texture sheet animation and just start assigning sprites. So I can assign a few different sprites for the snowflakes that I want to appear, and I can just randomize the snowflake patterns like that. And this will make your snowflakes, your particles look a lot more snowy. I'm just gonna put some snow particles over here as well, you know. So there are snowflakes and snow particles, and it makes it feel very festive. And for these sprites to be randomized, I'm gonna have to set the FPS to 0. so that it doesn't advance any frames. And we have 6 frames over here, right? So then I'm just gonna render two constants for the start frame and set this to 0, and so because there are 6 items here, 0 and 7. Okay, Unity automatically limits the start frame over here for you. And then now if you see the projectile, you will see snowflakes start to appear instead of the default. Oh, look at that. So again, you want to control the size depending on your preferences. If you don't like the size to be this big, you can always reduce the size of the snowflakes like that. So I can just hit back here and reduce the size of the particle. So up to you, you can just modify the different parameters to make it feel frosty or less frosty. And once you're done, you can of course prefab the whole thing, but before you prefab it, make sure to zero everything out. And yeah, and you can place it in your project. And this is the Clock Lancet effect. Again, it's a little different from what's in the picture, but you know, the main points are there. It's just because the values are a bit different. That's why the particle effect looks a little bit different. Oh yeah, the other thing I want to say is that once you prefab this and make sure that of course the position and rotations are 0, you can also do this in 3D. This looks great in 3D as well. Oh, the camera is in 2D. So let me just go back to the scene view, and you can see the particle effect is flying. Alright, so particle effects, when you create them in 2D, they also work in 3D generally. At least the videos that I create, we will try and achieve this with a particle effect. So even if you're making a 3D game, you can still watch this video to get the effect that you need. Okay, next thing I want to show is the buff effect that appears on enemies when they get hit with the beam. So what happens is if you see the enemy gets tinted blue, that one, well, I can't give you a tutorial on that because you just gotta go to the sprite renderer and change the color to blue. And that depends on how your game is coded. If you want to have an idea of how I've coded mine, you can look at the part 23 article, or if you're watching this and the part 23 video has come up, you can also watch that video to see how I do that. It's a whole lot of code, and there are a lot of systems that control the color of the unit. So it's not something that I can go into and create a video for you. But the buff effect, I can do that. And let me just show you how the buff effect is created for the frost effect. So what we have here is we have a particle system, and what I want to do this time is frost effect is just smoke and shock waves coming out in waves, right? So we're gonna use Kenny's particle effect spreadsheet. So this is covered again in the watch this first particle effects video. So if you don't know where to get this spreadsheet, watch that video first. And I'm just gonna call this freeze buff. And what's gonna happen here is I'm just gonna have the particle effect emit some smoke, and it's just gonna, you know, be smoke coming out of the character, and smoke and shock waves and a little bit of glow. And this is gonna be really fun to create. So the default particle effect always goes upwards, right? And I'm just gonna disable shape over here so that now we have just the particles appearing in just one stationary place. You can zero out the rotation here as well if you want to. It's actually quite important. So we should do that for the sparks over here as well. Okay, it's already zeroed out. That's great. So whenever you create a particle effect in Unity, the rotation by default is -90. Just zero it out, just so that later on when you create, when you instantiate them, you don't get weird facing issues like orientation issues with your particle. So what I want to do is have smoke, right? So I'm just gonna go to renderer here, and first thing I want to do for almost all particle effects, if you use the additive particle, it always looks better, right? Because it looks more glowy. And of course, you want to change the color to blue. And look at that, and randomize the size a little bit, maybe 1 to 1.5, maybe 1 to 2. Right, then let's reduce the start lifetime. I'm just gonna, so usually when you create particle effects, most of them, you know, you play around with the same values almost all the time. And because we want the smoke to be appearing over different intervals, right, I'm just gonna get the particle effect to loop over a duration of 0.7 seconds like this. I'm gonna go to emission, and I'm gonna zero out the rate over time, and instead replace it with a burst like that. So then the burst is gonna be 2. So how strong you want the burst to be, how many particles you want the burst to have, depends on how bright you want the particle effect to have. Because when we have additive particles, then when you have multiple particles overlapping each other, then it gets brighter. I'm gonna go to texture sheet animation next, and I'm just gonna go to sprites, and I'm just gonna place some smoke over here. I'm gonna place the smoke in this order so that you can see 1, 2, and 3. Alright, and when you place multiple sprites, they become an animation. So then let me just show this to you, right? So then the smoke particles, when they appear, they will animate themselves as well. See that? And finally, let's reduce the lifetime because I think is it too long? Okay, let's reduce the particle effect even more. Okay, so let's try this, alright? Let's go to size over lifetime. I think this works now, right? When we do a size over lifetime, let me just drag out the inspector again. Okay, size over lifetime here gives us a graph, and the graph over here is from small to big because we want the smoke to grow, right? So exactly what we are going for. Next thing I want to do is to get the particle effect to fade away. So I'm going to do a color over lifetime like this. I'm just going to fade the alpha like that. Yeah, I think it looks a lot better now. So basically with a lot of particle effects, what we are actually doing is we're just layering multiple effects on top of one another. So then I'm just gonna grab this freeze debuff over here and just do a duplication. And okay, before I do that, right, if you want to make the effect brighter, if you don't think it's bright enough, one thing I forgot as well is the randomized start rotation. So this makes it look more organic. So the smoke isn't always in the same orientation, it's really important. And also, if you want to make everything look brighter, you can set the just increase the number of particles that you spawn. So it's up to you how you want to configure your particle effect. I'm just gonna make this a little more subtle. This is what I'm going for, so I'm not gonna make this so bright. Okay, let me duplicate this, and this one I'm just gonna call this the glow. And the glow is gonna have the exact same settings, except that I'm gonna parent it to the freeze debuff. And I'm gonna replace the texture sheet animation with, well, something that looks more glowy. So this time, there's only one particle effect I'm going for. It's this one, right? And again, it's really important that you randomize the rotation of your particle effects. Otherwise, things will look very inorganic. So over here, let me just disable this. Let me just show you the glow by itself. Right, the glow is just a burst that draws your attention to the center of the particle effect. Yeah, so without the glow, everything looks a little more dull. I'm just adding a little glow here, and you can make the glow a little more exciting as well by having it have a larger range of sizes. So I can change the start size from like 1 to 4. So then you'll see the glow always changes size, and this can make things look a little bit more exciting. Okay, last thing I want to do is to duplicate the glow as well, and I'm just gonna change the start size here to 2.5, and I'll replace this last effect with a shockwave. And I'm gonna name this shockwave. So the shockwave is from Penny's sprite sheets as well. You can pick any one of these shockwaves. And now our effect has, it looks quite different now, right? Let me just play this and show this to you. Yeah. So then this effect I use it to show when an enemy is hit by a debuff. So you can play around with different textures over here as well. Kenny has a whole bunch of them. You can just replace the textures that I shared with you with other textures, and you can see how you can make this unique and into your own piece of work. Okay, one last thing as well is let me just prefab this. Okay, so when you put the effects into your game, right, you've got to also pay attention to in 2D games, right? So for example, if I put my VFX prefab right here, you see that this doesn't show up. Okay, so if your particle effects don't show up or your trails don't show up, you just gotta find the component and just go to find the sorting layer property, and you just gotta move it to the foreground. And make sure that you do that for all of your particles, all your children as well, because otherwise you'll see some parts of it but not all parts of it. See that? So right now, if I leave out the baby projectile here, I don't set the sorting layer, then the baby projectile will not appear. Only the main projectile will appear, and this makes it look less impressive. And you might also want to play around with order layer. Again, depending on how your project is set up, just make sure to not forget the sorting layer when you try and use your prefabs, alright? So if it looks a little off, then you might have missed something out. And the last thing, of course, for particle effect is go to renderer, and then you've got this is where you find the sorting layer under the renderer module. Sorting layer is right here, screen. So right here, under renderer, it's all the way at the bottom, and then foreground, the sorting order and layer is right here as well. Okay, so if your particle effect is not showing, then the first thing you want to do is just head into the renderer layer of your particle effect, or the sorting, or under tray renderer, it's just under additional settings, and find the sorting layer in both cases. That's all for this video. Thank you very much. I'm gonna keep this video short, yeah, so if you have any questions, just post it as a comment on this video or on our forums. Yeah, I'll see you all